What's up guys, TopTierYugioh here, and today we have a match with pure true Dracos versus Zoodiacs, and I really want to go through this match, break it down and give you my thought process, and sort of what I was thinking when going through this match, and really just to display sort of the technical side of this format, because I think it could help a lot of people just to give this sort of example. But then also I want this to be a really interactive video, and so there are going to be a lot of polls in the top right corner of the screen, so keep looking up there. I'm going to be asking you guys a lot of questions on like what the correct play would have been, what I should have done, what could have been happening, what the outcomes could be. So pay attention guys, this is going to be a good one. So let's go ahead and start the match. And if you guys want to see the deck that I'm using, the deck will be at the end of the video of course. And so this is game 1 against Zoodiacs. Like I said, we lose the die roll, so he's going to be going first. And he starts off his play with a Thoroughblade, so he's going to go to the regular Zoodiac plays with just the Leica. And he's going to be able to fuse for the Norden with the fusion substitute. He's going to bring back the Thoroughblade and then go into a Broad Bow and then make a Trident. So here he had the opportunity to also go into Emerald and shuffle 3 back and draw an extra card, but he chose to draw 1 less card so he can end with the Trident. And so what this sort of tells me is that he needs a little bit more defense, and he's not very confident in the defense that he has right now. So he set 2 back row, but we don't know what those could be. And now because this is a Zoodiac deck, generally they're going to play cards like Strike, Torrential Tribute, Twin Twisters, possibly, but we just don't know. But he does have 4 cards in his hand. We know 2 of them. One of them is a rat, one of them is a whiptail, so he does have a follow-up play with that rat. Also, it's important to note because he did his Lunalight play like that, I'm assuming that he does also have another fusion substitute in his deck to use with the rat that he has in his hand. And so then we draw a return, and so for our hand we have 2 Disciples, a Masterpiece, Duality, a Terraforming, which is going to be a diagram, and then return. And now the most important thing in this hand I think is we have to deal with this Trident, because if we don't deal with Trident, we can't resolve the diagram that we're going to eventually search. And so I think that really gives us 2 major options with this hand. So right now we could set the Disciples into the return, tribute both of those for a Masterpiece, and then Disciples can pop one of his back row, return can pop the Trident, and then Masterpiece can pop the other back row. But now the problem with that is that our Masterpiece will not be immune to monsters, so he will chain the Trident, destroying the Masterpiece. So that'll just be a 3-for-3 trade, which will just simplify the game state pretty much, and I think he's going to be in an advantageous position if we were to do that because he does have the rat in his hand. So I don't really want to simplify the game state because he has that rat. And even though that we know we'll be able to resolve the diagram, I'm not too sure what we could do with just diagram, a second Disciples, and a Duality. And of course it does depend on what we get from the Duality, but we'll see about that later actually. And now another option would be to just let him pop the diagram and then continue beating through his board just without a diagram, because after we bait the Trident, we'd be free to do whatever else we want. And there is also a possibility that we get a second diagram off the Duality. But again, the problem with this is that if we were to make a Masterpiece, we don't have any monsters, so our Masterpiece would be very vulnerable to their Trident. And so I think in this case, we'd end up wasting resources summoning the Masterpiece wouldn't be a very valuable one, and then he does again have that rat in his hand for next turn. But something else that I was worried about was that I didn't want to necessarily tribute off the return, because return gives us a pretty good follow-up play on our next turn and also gives us a monster for tribute fodder if we do draw another Masterpiece or a Dynamite. And so I didn't want to just tribute off the return. So what I decided to do was actually to play the Duality and then see what we get, because if we get another diagram, then we could afford to waste one. If we get another True King or True Draco spell or trap, we could tribute that instead of having to tribute the return, so that way we do have the return for a follow-up play or for some defense. And so I thought the Duality would give us a couple of more options. And so I'm activating the Duality, and then we get a Heritage, a Macrocosmos, and a Cosmic Cyclone. And we definitely don't want the macro right now because that doesn't answer his board. It doesn't really do much for us at this point. Now it would have been great if we already had our stuff set up, like we can make plays. Then macro would be great on top of that because he does have a rat. He is going to need to do his Lunalight play. And also macro stops hand traps. So macro would be good in general if we were going first, but because we're going second, it's not as valuable. And then as for the Cosmic Cyclone, we already do have outs to his board through the Masterpiece that we're going to summon, and then we do have Disciples that once into the graveyard can destroy a spell or trap, so I'm not too worried about destroying another spell or trap. That isn't necessarily too valuable right now. But the Heritage is actually very, very, very valuable, because before we couldn't set the both Disciples then tribute both for Masterpiece and then pop both his back row, because Disciples is only once per turn, so we can't use both of them. But now that we have Heritage and Disciples, we could set both Heritage and Disciples, tribute both of them for Masterpiece, pop both back row, and then have the Masterpiece pop the Trident. And then of course the Trident will pop the Masterpiece, but then at least we'll have the at least in that situation we're gonna have the return to follow up with. So whereas before we didn't have the return because we tributed it off. And so I do like this play a lot better. And now another option that the Heritage would have given us is to still tribute the return along with Disciples to summon the Masterpiece, and then when he uses the Trident to destroy Masterpiece, we would have lost like a monster spell in the trap, so Disciples would have drawn us 3 more cards, which is extremely powerful. And so ultimately I think that's probably the best play. But unfortunately he does have a Drolan Lockbird, which means we won't be able to do any more searching or drawing for the rest of the turn, which really limits our options after that. And so at this point, I figure it probably would be best to tribute both of the spells and then summon the Masterpiece and have the return as a follow-up play. But here I was very indecisive actually until I set the return and then both spells, and I ended up actually tributing the trap. I ended up tributing return, one of the spells for the Masterpiece, and I ended up really getting punished for that because one of his back row was a Twin Twister, so he was able to discard another card and then destroy my other back row. So he was able to destroy a Heritage, then I lost the Disciples and the return along with my Masterpiece. So now we both only have 2 cards. He has Rat and then 1 unknown card in his hand. Or I'm sorry, he has the Rat and the Whiptail in his hand. I know that because he searched it. But then all I have is a Disciples that I can't use this turn, then a Terraforming that I also cannot use this turn. And so this leaves me in a really bad position, and then it also leaves me with the exact same problem that I had this turn, and that he would have a Trident, and then I would have a Diagram, and I can't answer his board with a Diagram. And so there's going to be a poll in the top right corner of the screen what the correct play would have been in that game. Should I have tributed return in the spell for the Masterpiece? Should I have let him just destroy the Diagram and then continue through his board without worrying about the Trident? Or maybe I should have just said everything and passed turn because he probably couldn't kill me anyways? Or did it just not matter? Like, was I just going to lose that duel anyways? Was there no way to win that? Let me know. There's going to be a poll in the top right corner of the screen. Again, keep checking there throughout this video because there are going to be various questions that I'd like your input on. But let's go ahead and move on to game 2. And so this is going to be a little bit different because we're going to be going first and we've also sided, so that's awesome. And so we open up with a Masterpiece, Card of Demise, Duality, Return, and then Warning. And so I think the priority right now is to maximize the cards that we would draw off of the Demise, because this deck needs card advantage in order to really function, and it's hard to really do much with just 5 cards. But the problem with maximizing the cards we draw off the Card of Demise is that we have a Masterpiece that's stuck in our hand, so we want to tribute summon that first. But to do that, we're going to need another continuous spell or trap, because the only one we have now is Return. And so I think we sort of have to play the Duality first in this case and really hope for a continuous spell or trap, so that we can tribute the Masterpiece and then draw 3 more cards. And now, even though this is going to be a weak Masterpiece, like it would be only immune to spells and traps, or maybe just traps, we would have a follow-up play most likely. So I go ahead and activate the Duality. So then off of the Duality, I reveal a Pot of Desires, Dimensional Barrier, and then Diagram. And so there's going to be a poll in the top right corner of the screen. Which one of these do you think I should have chosen? And so Pot of Desires is really good because it's very likely that we would have drawn another continuous spell or trap off of the Desires, which is exactly what we would have wanted. But we also could have drawn a monster, but that's not as likely because there are only 6 of them in the deck, and we already have 1 in our hand. And so this would have given us a lot more card advantage, so Desires is very desirable. But Barrier is also really good because it's going to shut him off for a turn. And so with that turn, we could also probably draw into something else, and our hand isn't amazing, so any extra turns would be nice, really. And then finally the Diagram, and while Diagram is a really good card, I think this was probably the worst choice because we don't really have much that we want to destroy. Like, we don't want to destroy the Warning or the Return because there's nothing to pop on his side of the field for Return. We obviously don't want to destroy our Masterpiece, Demise, or Duality, so we can't destroy the Duality anymore, so we don't really have anything that's good to destroy. And then we need more than 1 card. So like we would have to end up popping like the Warning, for example, in order to search something to tribute the Masterpiece, and that's just not really worth it yet. But ultimately I ended up going with the Barrier because Demise is still going to be strong even though we're only going to draw 2 cards. But I think having a Barrier against Zoodiacs is just so important. I think this is better than probably any 1 extra card that we would have drawn. And so I thought that this was maybe the correct chance to take, although the Desires is a very tempting choice. And so then we go ahead and set the Barrier, activate the Demise, and then we draw Anti-Spell Fragrance and then a Heritage. And so we had another option here. We could have actually summoned the Masterpiece by tributing the Return and then the Heritage, but then that Masterpiece would be vulnerable to monster effects. But I didn't think it would be worth losing both of those cards for a Masterpiece that would just be outed by a Trident. And even though we had the Warning, he does play Twin Twisters and we know that. And so the Warning isn't exactly safe because we're going to flip the anti-spell up, and if he does chain with like a Twin Twisters or something that he could have, it's very likely that we lose the Warning. But then because we do have Return, even though we're discarding the Masterpiece for the Card of Demise, it's going to be something that we could bring back from Return, and it's honestly almost just as good, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And so in his standby phase, we're going to activate the Anti-Spell Fragrance, of course, and then he normal summons Denko Sekka. So good thing we had the Warning, right? Good thing we didn't destroy that with the Diagram that we could have searched, right? So having the Warning was good. He ends up having to set 3 cards, and I'm assuming most of them, at least 2 of the 3 are probably spell cards because we do have Anti-Spell up. But in the end phase, we do use Return to bring back the Masterpiece, so at least we have some damage on board. And then on our turn, we draw into a Terraforming. But unfortunately, because of the anti-spell, we do have to set that first. So the anti-spell slows us down too, but it slows him down as well. And I think in a situation where we can't activate spells, our deck is probably better because we do have the Masterpiece on board already. But unfortunately, he's able to draw into a Ghost Dash in this extra turn, so the terraforming might not be that useful later on. But the barrier that we searched did end up being very useful now. And so he's going to end his turn with a Broad Bull and a Whiptail. And so pretty much what this means is that I won't be able to attack over his Broad Bull because he'll just equip it with the Whiptail. And that's going to banish my Masterpiece, which I obviously don't want. And this is sort of the downside about having to bring back that Masterpiece. But fortunately, we do draw into a new Masterpiece that we can tribute summon so that we can actually deal with his Broad Bull and then his Whiptail. And so we're going to go ahead and activate the terraforming, but again, he has the Ghost Dash for that. But then we go ahead and tribute for our Masterpiece, then use Return to destroy his Broad Bull. But he changed the Zoodiac combo to equip a, I didn't quite see what it was, but he equipped something to it, I think a rat, to the Broad Bull, so that way he has enough cards to activate the return. The combo next turn. And then because we had Return and then a Masterpiece go to the graveyard, we're able to use our True Draco Heritage to draw 2 more cards. And then we drew into a second Heritage and then a Disciples. But now the problem here, and I guess this isn't really too big of a problem, but is that we only have one spell or trap in the graveyard for Masterpiece, and that is the Return. So we have to be very careful with what we use this Masterpiece on, and I'm going to be sure to save it for only things that would be a threat to this particular Masterpiece. And so he immediately goes into a Hammer Kong, which is a really good idea because now I won't be able to deal with any of his Zoodiac monsters, and it pretty much guarantees that he's going to be able to pop the anti-spell fragrance with the Trident. This guarantees that, so there's nothing I can do about that at this point. So again, I just have to wait until he summons something that's actually a threat. Another option will be to destroy his back row. I don't know what that is, and it's been set the whole game, so I'm assuming that it could be a bluff, because if it were a Twin Twisters, he could have used it. If it were a Strike, he couldn't have used it, so Strike is possible. If it's a Battle Trap, he could have used it, or if it was like a Torrential Tribute, he also could have used it. So I'm assuming that it's either like a Strike. I doubt he would have barriers in his deck, so it's probably a Strike or a Bluff. But it is something I'm a little concerned about, and so he does pop the Anti-Spell Fragrance, but then he plays a Dark Hole, which is really a hefty thing to do because he has 3 monsters on board and he's going to lose all of them. But he was very smart to use a Leica to bring back the Ram. That way he does have a follow-up play. But I am going to end up destroying his back row, which was a bluff as a fusion substitute. But it was cool that he brought back the Ram because that allowed him to summon back a Thoroughblade, which gave him an extra draw. But he did discard the Whiptail that he searched. And so he's going to pass turn with just a Borbo, 2 cards in hand, and he did search a Whiptail, but he discarded Whiptail for a Thoroughblade, and I was really confused here because I wasn't sure like what he had in his hand. Because you do play 3 Whiptails in a lot of cases, so he could have been like a second Whiptail, because a Whiptail would be really good to have in this situation for him. Like, you just don't want a Borbo with no Whiptail or, you know, anything. But with a Whiptail, it's at least 2800 that banishes stuff, so it's a lot better. And so we draw into a Dynamite here. And so the first thing I do is use Disciples to shuffle back and maybe get a second draw, something a little bit more useful. We drew into Anti-Spell Fragrance, and this was a mistake that I made because I attributed a Disciples for the Dynamite because I had already used the effect. I didn't think it would be useful anymore. There weren't very many cards in the graveyard to actually shuffle back, and there wouldn't be for a long time, at least according to my initial calculations. But this was actually a mistake because I had another Heritage set on the field, so I should have attributed one of the Heritages and then kept the Disciples. So this was actually a huge mistake that I made. And another reason I did this was because I did want to draw a card with the Heritage. But again, this just was not worth it. Regardless of what I had drawn, it would have been better to just have attributed the other Heritage and then activated the second one to draw for that one. But then when I attempt to attack with the Dynamite, he does activate a Whiptail. So he did have a second Whiptail in his hand. I mean, you guys can see that, but I didn't know that. And so with Dynamite, I decided to activate an Apocalypse from the deck. And so here, again, I had 2 options. Or I guess 3 options. I could have activated a Return from the deck, but that obviously isn't a very good option because I didn't have any monsters in the deck. If this attack goes through, Dynamite would have been banished, so Return was not the best option here. So you can already cross that one out. So the second option here would have been to activate the Apocalypse, then use Apocalypse to destroy the Heritage, and then use that Heritage to destroy Apocalypse, and then when Apocalypse is sent to the graveyard, I could destroy his Borbo, which would allow me to attack directly with the Dynamite. And then I could have set the Anti-Spell and the Cosmic Cyclone for defense. And now the problem with this play, in my opinion, was that although I do have an Anti-Spell Fragrance, it isn't very much defense. Like, if he summons like a rat or something, there's nothing I can do about that. Or if he summons a Terratop, I couldn't answer that. And so I wasn't too sure if I should do that. And now another option that I had was to activate the Apocalypse to destroy the Dynamite. So at least that way I'm not forced into attacking his monster and taking more battle damage and then getting my Dynamite banished. But then at the same time I would still have the Apocalypse and the Heritage on board so that I have defense on his next turn. Like, I can have his monsters attack again, and then I could also just use Heritage to destroy Apocalypse and pop one of his monsters. So if he did draw like a rat or something, I'd have an answer to that, because he probably wouldn't be able to kill me with just 1 card in his hand. so I'd get an extra turn, and so I did value that extra time a little bit. And so ultimately, I ended up actually just destroying my own dynamite. That way I'd be able to survive the next turn, and then I just set the rest of my back row. So then he actually draws into a rat, lucky him, normal summons it, goes through his rat combo. And here, when he summoned the rat, I initially thought about destroying the rat, like just using Apocalypse to have his attack, destroy the Heritage, destroy Apocalypse, and then use that to destroy the rat. I thought about doing that, but then I looked at his graveyard. He didn't have a Tiger Mortar in it yet. And so I decided not to do that because he could have just summoned Tiger Mortar, got back the rat, and then continued his combo. So I didn't want to do that, so I really had to wait until the proper time to really use my Apocalypse play. And so I thought to best maximize that, I should do it when he has more monsters anyways. And so I do it in the battle phase. I don't do it until like his last attack pretty much, and I destroy whatever he equips both of his whiptails to, which ended up being a Trident, which works out better in my favor. He should have done that last. He definitely should have attacked last with the Borbo, and then equipped everything to the Borbo, but then still had the Trident, because that would have still left him with a pretty strong defensive monster, instead of just being left with a Borbo. But I was able to survive the turn, and then I drew into a Masterpiece, which was really lucky because I was able to tribute my anti-spell fragrance and then my Heritage in order to destroy his monster with Masterpiece and attack direct for 29. So then now I was just left with a Cosmic Cyclone, Masterpiece. He has one card in his hand. I'm assuming it's dead because he hasn't used it and it's been in his hand for like 3 turns. But it all depends on what he draws, but I do have Masterpiece for whatever it is. But he does brick, and so I'm able to win that game. But in retrospect, I definitely misplayed with the Dynamite and the Apocalypse. The correct play in that situation would have been to, well, first not tribute the Disciples. Like that would have been the first change I would have made in the path to enlightenment or correctness or whatever. But definitely I should have used the Apocalypse to destroy the Heritage, and then use Heritage to destroy Apocalypse, which would have destroyed his Borbo and allowed me to attack direct with Dynamite for 25. So that would have left him with under 1,000 life points. And then at the same time, I had a second Heritage on the board. I could have flipped that face up, and then when he activated an effect, I could have set another Apocalypse and then had that same defensive play to where I could have halved his attack and then destroyed the Heritage, which would destroy the Apocalypse and allow me to pop one of his monsters. So I would have had the same defensive play, except I would have also had a Dynamite on board on top of that. And so I think that probably would have been the best play. And I'm not sure if he could have outed that, honestly. It sort of would have depended on what I destroyed with the Apocalypse. But I'm not sure if he could have outed that. And if I had drawn that Masterpiece that next turn, or I would have shuffled my deck because I would have searched the Apocalypse, but never mind. So it's interesting to say what would have happened in that case. So let me know what you think in the comment sections on that. Like what should have happened in that duel and what would have been the result. So I'm interested to hear your guys' opinion on that. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to game 3. And so in this game, we're going to be going second once again. And similar to game 1, he starts his playoff with a Whiptail and then does his Luna Light combo from there. And he does choose not to go into the Emerald for the extra draw. So he ends with a Trident and then multiple back row. And I know that he searched a rat. So I know he has rat in hand and 2 other cards in his hand. So this is actually pretty interesting because he still has 2 monsters and a rat in hand. I know they're not back row because if they were back row, he would have set them. And so what could those extra monsters be? And so I'm assuming that at least one of them is a hand trap. So I have to play around that. And so we open up with Pot of Duality, Dimensional Barrier, 2 Cosmic Cyclones, and 2 True Draco Heritages. So not the best hand. We really don't have a play unless we get something good off of the Duality. So we need this Duality in order to have anything at all. So Duality has to be the first thing that I do because I want him to at least think that I have other plays. So I don't want to like set on my back row then play Duality. That would just tell him to definitely use Ghost Dash. Although even in that situation I could have set like a Demise or a Desires. You just don't know. But nonetheless, I have no choice but to use Duality. I activate it and he doesn't negate it. And my options are Barrier, Terraforming, and then Diagram. And this was a tough choice. I mean, I'm going to put a poll in the top right corner of the screen. I want to know what you guys would have gotten. But Barrier is really good because it's going to pretty much skip one of his turns. And even though I already have one and it is once per turn, it's a skip a turn. I need as many turns, extra turns as I can get right now because my hand was so weak. I need a lot of extra time here. And then next we had the Terraforming and the Diagram. You definitely want to always choose Diagram over Terraforming because Diagram of course can lose to Ghost Ogre. It's going to lose to the Trident. But Terraforming can also lose to Ghost Dash too. So Terraforming gives your opponent like one extra card that they could have that could negate it. And even though it thins your deck a little bit, it's just not safe to use when you know your opponent probably has a hand trap. And so I ended up getting the Diagram because I think that's going to be more important to my late game. I think once I can actually get Diagram on the board and use it, it's going to be much more valuable to me than everything else because the Barrier is going to be good. But every barrier that I activate is a -1, and I don't want to lose the resource battle to Zoodiacs really. And so what I decided to do was to hope that he can't kill me on his next turn, but then use the barrier on my next turn that way I can stop his Trident and then safely activate my Diagram. And so because this is game 3, I know a lot of the cards in his deck at this point. And so he's already revealed a Twin Twister, so he could have one set. I have to play around that. And so I can't just set the one barrier. If I just set one barrier, it's going to get destroyed. And so I have to be very careful with what I set, and also the order and the positioning of how I set them. And so what I decided to do was set 4 back row, because a lot of players sometimes they want to hit the middle. Like if you have an MST, if this was an MST format, like back in the day, people would always hit the middle card. So you could sort of play around that knowledge. And so in this game, I wanted to sort of play to that same sort of mindset. So in the middle, I was sure to put two Draco heritages. So if he hit either card in the middle, like the middle left or middle right, he's going to be punished for it. And then between where it's going to put the barrier, I could have either put it on the left side or the right side. So the side that's nearest my main deck or the side that's nearest my extra deck. And then in this regard, I think a lot of players tend to look at where there's more emphasis. And in this type of deck against true Dracos, you know I'm not going to the extra deck. And so there's not very much emphasis on the extra deck. And so a lot of times people are going to shoot towards your main deck because there's more emphasis on that. They're looking more at your main deck. It's more important what's in your main deck. And then by sort of that association, people tend to think that the card closest to your main deck is going to be more valuable. Another thing about that is that most players are right-handed. And of course this is different on YGO Pro. Most players are right-handed. And so a lot of times people subconsciously put the most valuable card on their right side because for one, it's closer to your main deck, which is more valuable, but also it's closer to the hand that you're more comfortable using. And it sort of goes with, like, you know, your right hand man, like your right hand trap. And this is actually a very real thing. And even though, again, this is online, it doesn't quite matter as much. It's something to keep note of when you're playing in real life and also even online. It's something that subconsciously happens. And so I want to be wary of that because this is like a game changing decision. Like if he Twin Twisters this in my end phase and hits my barrier, I definitely lose. And so I was sure to put the barrier away from the point of emphasis. And now he plays a barrage first, so I'm forced to use the Cosmic Cyclone on that, which is bad because now that I have 3 cards, if he does have a Twin Twisters, so like with MST I mentioned that it's more easier to just hit what's in the middle. With Twin Twisters, people tend to hit the outside too if you have 3. Like if you have any sort of odd number backward, they hit the outside ones. If you have an even number, they hit the middle too. And so now that I used the Cyclone, I was really worried about the Twin Twisters now, actually. But I go ahead and let him go through his rat plays. I'm not going to do anything about that because, again, I just want to negate his Trident on my turn so that I can use my diagram and actually get a play. Because if I barrier him on his turn, I still don't have a play, and my diagram still loses to his Trident. And then on my turn, I draw into a Pot of Duality. And I go ahead and activate the Duality. He does negate that with a Ghost Dash, which is sad. And so I don't have any more plays. He still could have the Twin Twisters. I still don't know what any of those back row are, but now I have 2 Tridents to deal with. So I have to use the barrier right now. And then after using the barrier, both his Tridents are negated, and I have 2 cards that are useful. I have Cosmic Cyclone and I have the Diagram. So I have 2 options here. I can use the Cyclone and maybe see what some of those back row are. Maybe, luckily, I hit the Twin Twisters, or maybe I hit the Cyclone or whatever he's playing. Maybe. Or I can activate the Diagram, and he might just not have Twin Twisters. Like, all of this thinking and worrying about the Twin Twisters could be just for no reason. He might not have it, and this could be fantastic, in which case I could activate my my Diagram, destroy one of my cards, get rid of one of his other back row with the Cosmic Cyclone, and then really get my plays going. But unfortunately, he does have the Twin Twisters, and he decides to use it to destroy Diagram on one of my back row. Good thing they're both heritages, right? Haha, joke's on you. And so he destroys my Diagram and my heritage. Heritage destroys one of his other back row, and then Cosmic Cyclone hits the 3rd back row. And then finally, I use Heritage, the 2nd one, to draw another card. I draw into a Dynamite. I'm able to summon it, but at this point, it really doesn't matter. So I just attack over one of his monsters, and then proceed to let him Dougie on me on the next turn. So this game is pretty much over. I don't have enough resources to combat his field. He's able to draw more cards with Daigusto Emerald, combo, and really just go off on me. Him having that Twin Twisters hurt a lot, and I'm not sure even if he didn't have Twin Twisters, if I would have been able to come back. My hand was just generally weak to start with, and that sort of takes me back to that duality that he did let me get off. Maybe it would have been better to have the barrier, that way I would have been guaranteed an extra turn. So I just wanted to show you guys this match and sort of showcase this matchup, and then how you have to think when going through this matchup, a lot of the different possibilities, things you need to play around, looking at things like what your opponent has in their deck, some of the options that they have, like realizing that he played Twin Twisters in game 1, then remembering that for game 3 so I can sort of play around that, or looking at what he's used in his graveyard, then taking that forward into the next games, using that as information, and just sort of playing around with what you know. And then also the mental game, like where I was setting the back row is actually really important. So I wanted to just showcase to you guys some of those things, like just the technical side of the game, really. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys answered all the polls, because I am looking forward to your answers. I am going to be looking at them. I'm going to be looking in the comment section for tips, critiques on how either of us could have made better plays, really. And so definitely let me know. If this is your first time seeing any of my videos, I hope this has inspired you to subscribe to the channel. Because seriously, the goal of this video was to improve the game. Like, it was to look at the technical aspects of the game and then determine what the best plays would have been so that we can take that moving forward, both me and you. But this isn't the only video with that goal. And so a lot of my videos are aimed at getting better at the game, improving, and then thinking more critically about the game. And I have many playlists devoted just to that. And so if you like content like this, definitely subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and I think it would be beneficial to both you and me. And so as always guys, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.